Zero Foxtrot does not profess to share or promote the opinions and beliefs expressed by show host or guests. The Stay Zero podcast was created to provide a platform for servicemen and women to share their stories. Due to the nature of this podcast, sensitive topics will arise. Conversations about combat, PTSD, drug use, and other such subjects will occur. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the Stay Zero podcast. I have John Holder here with me. Thank you, John, for coming in.
Great being here, man.
And you were the founder of Oceanic Expeditions, right?
Yes.
How do you describe that to people? What is it that you do?
Well, I took a lot of grief to begin with, as you can imagine. Back in the day, the internet was just coming around.
Yeah.
And my T-shirts, Oceanic Expeditions, Austin, Texas. Friends and associates, well, how do you do that from there? Now, there's that little thing called jet aircraft and the internet, But essentially, OE was a creation of mine to offset costs initially on my elaborate trips that more and more elaborate, going farther and farther afield. What happened over the years, I became dissatisfied with the normal and always wanting to serve. I decided I wanted to give back. So I morphed it into a science-based projection entity. So
wow.
That's really the evolution. In 93, I created it really as a side job to offset costs so I could afford these elaborate.
What kind of trips were you taking?
I was going, going to Cocos Island for liveaboard trips and Africa, a lot of Central America, of course, Panama, Galapagos, destinations like that.
What were you doing there?
Primarily diving.
Okay.
And one of the things, very much like military service, when you get involved with these very specific activities, what you become aware of is all the ancillary. The stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah.
It just so happened that some of these amazing destinations for diving were great for cultural interactions, geophysics, birds, bugs,
Yeah.
So it became more of a mission, and I saw that the real meat on the bone was the story and empowering scientists. So that's when I morphed from being really just a high-end dive entity into really trying to focus on regions that lended themselves to the kind of exploration that clients are looking for. Once you've done something, you want another challenge.
Sure.
So my clients tend to be, high-end people that have done a lot and are looking for that other thing, if you will. And the purpose of a mission, very, very much like in the military, when you add that component, what you do is you describe what you're going to do, you go do it, and then you report your findings. Mm-hmm. And that's what differentiates exploration from travel. And so that was really the morph that I made over about a decade when I transitioned in, juggling a family like you, 2 young kids.
Oh, yeah.
Working hard, wanting a good time.
Yeah.
And that was satisfying to a point, but then it became less and less satisfying because I'd done so much, free diving, skydiving, paragliding, flying helicopters, But unless there's a purpose behind it, it's all just a bunch of joy, adrenaline rushes. Skydiving's cool, but there's no application.
When it's self-serving, I think you get bored with it eventually.
You do.
And so once you've given that mission or given it that purpose to serve something else, it
really is.
It gives you a different perspective, right?
Yes, sir.
And so you started exploring like old military sites, right? Or
that was a big component of it,
right? And so a lot of these have been former like islands where there were battles and there were naval battles and finding
Absolutely.
These ships and these planes. And what are some of the stuff that you've been finding?
Well, to kind of backtrack a little, that's the genesis of this entire thing was the fact that I was lucky enough to be the son of a Cold War military officer. My dad served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And because of that, being a lifer fighter pilot, we lived all over the place. And I got exposed to broad cultural variances, travel, and everything that's involved. Had a very deep and profound love for the ocean at an early age. And the movie Jaws in 75 was the catalyst for me to get certified.
Really?
So lucky me.
Want to get eaten by a shark?
Well, I wanted to be an elasmobranch ichthyologist, but we'll get to that in a minute. That was
I don't even know what you just said.
yeah. No, I didn't either until I figured out that's what I wanted to do. That's a mouthful, but it basically means elasmobranchs are sharks and rays, and ichthyology is the study of fish.
Okay.
So like ornithology is birds and,
Okay.
All the various ethologies.
Right.
Though I let the scientists do that. I do all the history, but that's really what I discovered over time, because you go to these elite destinations and you interface with people. We're cultural, social entities, and we're out there doing our thing, and it's not just myopic. One thing led to another, and, all the brain gears started kicking, and I said, nobody really does something to further the human condition. Everything seems to be another joy, another, another trophy on the wall, another conversation around the water cooler.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do in my travels, I got to know scientists, and I found out that their funding was less and less. And they got into science not to stand in a lab coat in a lab and look at things that were collected 100 years ago in formaldehyde.
Sure.
They want to see context. They want to see the fish in the reef, the critters doing their thing or whatever. And that's what enabled me to make that change. And of course, with my father's exposure, I learned at an early age about mission and discipline and, service beyond self, et cetera, et cetera. And when I lost my eye and became combat ineffective, I still wanted to serve. And
how did you lose your eye?
Well, I was the commandant at the ROTC, Major Armstrong. Is quite a guy. I went out on a dive trip, and he didn't really know about it. And I was in the ROTC program, and compressor has all these different stages, and there's little pipes that go between them that equalize the pressure. Well, there was a breach in the fifth stage line, so nothing physically actually touched me. A 5,000 psi stream of air, like a laser beam, came in my lower eye and blew my eye out the socket and was hanging by the optic nerve.
Holy shit!
And that went my military career.
Yeah,
And at the time, I was between my sophomore and junior year at UT, and I was leading a dive trip, or not leading one, I was dive mastering on a dive trip out to the flower gardens, and I was bleeding a compressor that you do to kind of blow off all the detritus, the oil and the water that builds up from the compression process. I leaned over, which I'd done dozens of times, and this time there was that high pressure stream of air.
Wow.
But that didn't stop me. I wanted to serve. And I morphed, as I said, OE into what we talked about. But I also developed, systems for the special ops community, battery systems I was telling you.
Oh, yeah.
So I found a way to get back. So
that's from the other company, the Terra Sustainable Technologies, right? That you've started.
That's right. Well, no, I didn't start that. That's it's the Terra Group is a really big group that does a lot of. They do commercial real estate. They do land holdings internationally.
Okay.
They have an organic, kind of a green component, and I do the expeditionary and exploration stuff.
Okay.
So that was really what I do. And that's a long story in of itself, but I know we're jumping around a lot, but that's all right. It really is, the expeditions are what I found brought most satisfaction. And in serving, my component is I do the history. And I put together these expeditions for people that have to have this context, primarily geophysicists, biologists, sometimes anthropologists if the cultural component is enough.
Yeah. And
then I do the history.
Okay.
So the regions I go to lend themselves to these various disciplines. Instead of just going anywhere nilly-nilly or trying to go to different places all the time, I've been around enough and learned enough through my travels and expeditions to know where the low-lying fruit is, if you will, to go to where the really good stuff is.
What is the really good stuff? What is the information you're providing these scientists and these people that they're putting together, or what is it you're doing?
Well, it's the insight that you gain, once again, from being fortunate enough to travel a lot as a child, and then formal education, and then exercising it through actions, travel and expeditions. So what I realized were these three regions: the Equatorial East Africa, which is Tanzania, Mozambique, Madagascar, and the islands of the Straits.
Okay.
You have Central America, if you will, the Panamic region, which centers on Panama, Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador.
Yep.
That is a really cool area because it also has both the Atlantic and the Pacific sides. And then you have the Westpac, Melanesia, which is Fiji, Solomon Islands, New Guinea, Western Indonesia. These places are really cool because they have all those variables. Really good geophysics,
Okay.
really good biology, and really good anthropological and historical paths. Because of all that, you can take these teams and loose them to do their thing. The expensive thing, as you know, much like military operations, is getting there and being there. It's not so much doing your task.
Right.
And being an ornithologist is the same as being an ichthyologist from a resource thing. So cost sharing. And that's really the key strategy to what my expeditions have, is you're able to reduce the cost for the individual scientist or investigator by integrating systems and cost sharing.
Yeah.
And then having high-end clients pay for that privilege of being on these expeditions
Nice.
where they get to do something a little different.
So you did enough travel to network and find the demand and the need that all these people had, and then
Absolutely.
combine it together.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so what is it y'all are doing out there? What are you looking for, and what are you finding?
Well, my thing is history.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing at the genesis of all of this was me going to these areas that had really unique military history that I was interested in and discovered early on through other pathways. There was a whole nother conversation about looking for treasure. That's I call it fool's gold, because, you spend all that effort and time, and then attorneys, insurance companies, governments, they're the ones that get all the treasure, if you will.
And when you find like a treasure ship or something like that, you rarely get to keep it, right? Like that's
the point. It's
governing
finders, keepers,
right?
Losers, all that, that stuff. But that doesn't really work in the real world.
Right.
The litigation is astounding.
Yeah. Thanks for finding that for us. Give it back.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, a euphemism would be, if you find bullion and gems and coins and just everything that you can imagine, you end up with a single coin if you're lucky, and that's because you stuffed it in your wetsuit, because everybody comes.
With a policy like that, what stops people from just not reporting it?
Well, that's a very cool question and a whole nother podcast. No, I have friends that do that, and there's the tortoise and the hare, if you will. So translocation, out of sight, out of mind. You can take something and move it here, know where it is, and then work it around. And that's what some of these people that have gotten really sophisticated, I don't do, and don't take part in those kind of things, because once again, my thing is World War II history primarily, and the meat on the bone is the story. That's where they can't take that from you.
Sure.
That's yours. So I've done some treasure stuff enough to be aware and whatnot. It's not all it's cracked up to be, back in the old pirate days when there weren't satellites and systems and, Lloyds of London and.
Yeah. I think there is the only one that I'm aware of on the East Coast somewhere. There's a real ship that was found and has been brought up and kind of refinished in a museum.
The Etosha?
I think so.
Yeah, Mel Fisher's thing. Yeah, the 1715 fleet. Yeah.
Have you seen that? Have you been there?
Oh yeah, I've been to it. Actually, that's one of the events I was doing when I was a kid. They had this process where if you were a good diver, they would take you on as basically slave labor. Wow. So you go out there and run. They call it the lift. It's a vacuum. You stick in the sand and sucks everything up. And
wow.
So it was just a way to kind of do stuff and kind of learn.
Yeah.
It's a very narrow community, as you can imagine.
I bet, yeah.
People that have done this. My dive shop that I owned in Austin with a partner of mine, Glenn McFarland, was the first technical dive shop in the state of Texas.
Okay.
So because of that, I had all, call them the cowboy cave divers, the Jacob's Well stuff, and offshore wreck divers, and the spear fishermen, there were all these little cliques in that community. So we served, them, and that was another growth pattern. So
tell me about some of the sites that you've found. What are some of the, I guess, locations or artifacts that you've pulled up?
Well, I've been fortunate enough, not unlike the Mel Fisher thing where they had the volunteer stuff where you go out there. Very much, I call it Disneyland. That's the cool stuff. It's all cool. So don't get me wrong. I'm not degrading it, but there's stuff that you can go take part in. much like when you go to Arkansas, you can go to a diamond mine and,
Right.
and then you feel engaged. And there's a place and time for everything. What I wanted to do is really do the conceptual and application of that which hadn't been done. And going back to a question you asked a little earlier, what I did when I was down, when I wasn't diving or wasn't on shore doing things, I'd go hang out with the captain in the wheelhouse. Hey, mate, where haven't you been? Where do you want to go? And that was the genesis of OE. Changing was because once you get a relationship with these guys and you're hanging and, talking, doing the, shooting the shit, it's like, wow, okay, because they're so rigid. You imbue it with a lot of joy. You're going to some exotic destination.
Right.
There's a whale shark and, they see this every day.
Sure.
It's like if you live in Vegas, neon's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Or nipples.
Yeah. Or Austin. But that's really how I started tapping into it. And I realized then through what I was observing through the clients that I was traveling with, because that's how OE started, was a high end, kind of like, I'm going here, do you want to come? And all that. And listening to them talk amongst themselves and questions they asked me, the things that they really fastened on, that they really had joy from the expeditions. And then my interactions with captains and crews. And that's really what led me to realize, I need to work these charts, work these scenarios, figure out why and when. And that's what led me to these 3 regions that I told you about, because if all things are special, nothing is.
Yeah.
And those destinations lend themselves to these multiple disciplinary things. And the genesis of that was talking to the captains. And for me, the area of Indonesia and New Guinea, because there are just so many wrecks that have historical significance, naval and aviation wrecks. And a lot of the captains I dealt with over there, like Craig O and Alan Raby and, Rodney Pierce, these are all Aussie expats that moved up to New Guinea and Indonesia in the 80s and 90s, and were just able to ply those waters and do whatever they wanted. And when they weren't doing their standard stuff, they were out, pushing it farther, trying to find out what's there and why.
Yeah.
And really, I learned from them. What I had that they didn't have was the context of my father and his friends, and access to the records at Maxwell Air Force Base and down at Pensacola, Annapolis.
Put it all together, right?
Oh, yeah. So what I do that really differentiates me from most of the people that I deal with in this weird world of wreck exploration and all that, you find things, you stumble on things in the ocean. You're not really looking for it. Or you might be looking for it, but you don't know what it is. You just find something on your side scan, or you stumble on it diving, or you hear about a local, a native that found it. And then you have to figure out what it is. Well, what the hell is this thing? A pile of metal on the bottom. What I did was did all the research at the front end, and that's what separates me from really everybody else. I know what I'm looking for, so when I find it, I already have the story. I know the crew. I know the reason it went down. So a lot of cases, I know it's war record.
So you're going through like war records to find missing planes or missing subs or things, and then you're going to the area they were suspected to be lost or go down and trying to find them specifically.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Absolutely.
What are some of the ones that you found?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to find a couple of very significant aircraft in New Guinea and in the Solomon Islands and Australia, and ships. Now the ships, they're broken up in their Japanese barges and things like that. But the aircraft that we found one that was called the Stubborn Hellion, pretty well-known B-25. She went down off Kavieng, which is up in New Hanover, just north of New Ireland. It's one of the island groups off of New Guinea proper in the Bismarck Sea. Well, we were knocking around in there, and natives had told us about it, and one of my buddies that I collaborate with that owns Pacific War Wrecks database had been looking for this specific wreck for a long time. She went down in relatively shallow water in mangroves. So that's a problem in itself, because
they're going to grow all over it. Right?
And they're fast growing.
Right.
So, and turbid water too, not super clear like you want for, sexy pictures, exploring and all that. But when we were going through the Stubborn Hellion, we did find remains. And that ended up being Lieutenant John J. Howard, who was the navigator on board that plane. He was the only one that didn't survive the ditching, and that's something we'll get to here in a while. When aircraft crash out of the envelope, as it's called, they're generally a pile of metal on the bottom of the ocean. Hard things like landing gear struts, engines, guns sometimes, but the airframe itself is just mangled and messed up. If an aircraft ditches, it kind of sits there, sinks slowly, and then actually kind of glides to the bottom, and then can be just almost in pristine condition.
Wow.
And so that's one of the key aspects of, if you will, knowing the history. And when we get to the subject of the meat on the bone expeditions, to Borgen Bay and Cape Gloucester, the reason that's so cool is because of the volume of wrecks, the historical significance of them, and the fact that it's very shallow relatively. The Pacific's a big place, really deep water. And if it's beyond the human interactive range, it's not as sexy.
Right.
Because then you have to go down with submersibles, and it's expensive, and it's a whole different critter. If you can find wrecks in that, 60 meters, which is around 200 feet, or shallower, they're in the photic zone in the coral triangle, the most specious. That's a fancy way for saying lots of critters.
Yeah.
So these wrecks are literally covered in growth. So they're not only historically significant, but they give scientists a keystone for measurement of growth rates. So there's no way, if you have a ship or an aircraft that went down on X date, that coral was not growing on it prior to that date.
Sure. So you can pinpoint the exact day that aircraft got there, and then keep record of the coral development, the decay, all of those things by providing the scientists with a baseline.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Context, again. And that's where that whole win-win goes, the cost sharing, the discipline. As a dog leg to this, you'll like it. When I was doing all my high-end stuff, I had really high-end clients, and they can be a lot to deal with, right? I did not know what I was getting into until I got my first-tier scientists. Oh, my gosh. It's a whole different level, dude.
Yeah.
It's like babysitting, rabid cats, it's crazy. And then coupled with the high-end clients, and then a cranky crew. So, no, you end up being kind of like a risk management person.
Sure.
Chaperone.
Hardest part of every job's the people, right?
Well, I love people, but I can tell you, when you're in those contexts, I can only liken it to never having served but wanted to in military operations, because it's that purpose. You've got people that are highly effective, some that aren't. The precision of the machine is relying upon everything meshing. So there's a lot of that, but it's a joy factor of seeing these people come in with a myopic kind of view. I'm the world's greatest volcanologist and all that. But through my efforts in putting together teams, when they leave, they see the synergy. Without geophysics, no biology. Without biology, no history. So on. So there's an interlacing, and then they're best friends talking to each other. I've created more relationships and friendships, through those kind of actions than really anything.
That's awesome.
I love people. And that's really what it's about. It's improving the human condition.
Yeah.
Too much is done that is self-aggrandizing, adrenaline rushes, cool this, cool that, I've done a lot of really neat things in my life.
I think a lot of us chase those things when we're young. And then when we're older, we start looking for, how do I give something back? Like, what am I leaving behind? What's my legacy? What's,
Well said.
And our focus changes.
That ergo my thing, morphing from high-end travel, which was, going to cool spots and seeing lots of stuff, and morphing it into the science. That's really what it's about, is having purpose.
Yeah.
Trying to give back,
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. I think you found a way. I mean, you wanted to serve, you got injured, you weren't able to, and so you found another way, and you tied it into the military community. And so in that way, you're specifically giving back to the history of that.
Yes, sir. And one thing I'm very proud of is, the buddy that I was a partner in the dive shop, Glenn McFarland, he went to the state, and he was very desirous, because of our efforts through St. David's Hospital, to develop a program for disabled children, and not just physically, but mentally, autistic people that were unable to experience, because of the training criterion, scuba.
Okay.
So he, on his own accord, and I assisted him as a dive master, he's the instructor, it was his gig, but he developed a program that was for the adaptive community. So we had to learn how to purge regulators and, flood masks and clear them with hands that necessarily didn't work. And then also be able to assist people that couldn't do that.
Yeah.
To free them from gravity.
Wow.
One of the coolest things about diving is when you're good at it, you're neutrally buoyant is what it's called. So you're just hanging there. And these people are burdened by their disabilities, whatever it is, and whatnot. So that was a very, very fulfilling component of that period of my life, which was like in the early to mid 90s to the late 90s. Well, it ends up being that program was adopted by the Wounded Warrior program to be morphed into training wounded warriors to scuba dive. And my mentor in diving, John Dugan, who owns Dugan Diving down in Universal City, 3-tour in Nam, PJ, a commandant of the Siri School. He's the guy that ran the center down at BAMC, Brooke Army Medical Center, developed that same program that Glenn had done for the disabled kids at St. David's. He took that curriculum and then morphed it into the program that became the program that the Wounded Warriors do.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, I can see why not a lot of people before them took that on. That'd be a little bit scary.
Well, I'm sure
the liability of that, like taking someone underwater, that's tough.
Oh yeah,
that's awesome.
But Glenn was really amazing with that, and I just assisted him. That was his gig, but I helped him, and I was very proud to help him and go through the process and develop those processes. And then, of course, as it applies to the Wounded Warriors, now you're dealing with A-types, self-reliance, capable, get out of my way, I'm going to do it, hoorah, that whole thing.
Sure.
And it was just amazing to see that process. And early on, since I was with Dugan dive mastering for those programs, you would see amputees and burn victims, and, that was very obvious visually, you went, wow, you can see what it is. As the program morphed and they came up with the MRAPs and all these other things, you had brain and concussive injuries. This dude looked fine.
Yeah.
No amputees, no burns, no nothing. But he had a concussive event.
Yeah.
So that maturation from physical impairment to cognitive or processing ability, was really, really strange. But to go through and be able to interact with those warfighters and provide them with the joy and the freedom, was very, very fulfilling.
Yeah. I bet. You guys do, y'all hire veterans and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to look for veterans because you have to have capacities filled. An expedition, as you know, is different than a trip.
Yeah.
Because you're out sometimes in very austere conditions in remote areas, sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month in duration, going from land, sea, air, all things. So things can happen. So having warfighters that are used to being in the bush, that have the fortitude and the skill and the assets and training to do that. And then you couple it, especially if they have in-water skills, or if not just in-water scuba, and then medical training, things like that. So, and they tend to be proactive individuals too. So if they see something going to shit, they're on it,
What's the job like day to day? What is it? What are some of the requirements that these guys wanted to hire? They're listening now and they're like, wow, this guy's traveling the world.
Well, it's you got to love people to begin with. And I think that's a given. I mean, I know there's a lot of A-types out there.
The Marines are out, right?
It's the Marines. Well, my boy's in the Army, so that one of the jokes we said, what Army stands for is ain't ready for the Marines yet.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But they're all great. You know how it is. I mean,
sure.
The desire to serve, the patriot stripe that is evident in people of that mindset is humbling and very inspiring, and being able to provide pathways for them. That's really the cool thing. Another buddy of mine, which you might, kind of off our subject, but on yours, Dick Scott is the one of the chairmans of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, and he's a big safari guy. He always puts on a Wounded Warrior program at his ranch, the DS2 Ranch in Wimberley, every year for wounded warriors to come out and collect game. He has new guy and axis and of course whitetail, hogs, turkey, everything. So he does that very much.
That's cool.
Very much like what you do out at FTW.
Yeah.
And it's a small community. I can't tell you how many times you see somebody and they think, I've seen you somewhere. And, you know, it ends up being that whole camaraderie thing, you know. So I have some people you'd like to know, and I know there's some people who'd like to know you.
Oh, I'd love to get the connection. That'd be great.
Sure.
I'd love to hunt out there. That sounds awesome. I hear Nilgai is probably the best venison you can get.
It's supposed to be just like
incredible.
Just preeminent. I've had a lot. I haven't had new guy yet, but he's Dick's going to make me up some new guy. He said here soon. He's going to start me out with the ground.
Yeah.
I ain't worthy of the backstrap, I guess, but
you got to earn that. You got to shoot your first one.
Yeah. I hear you.
Can regular divers visit any of these sites? Or are these what's the red tape to get to these places?
Well,
how much money do they want? That's really what.
Yeah. Well, that's really one of the keys. Is I call it, you know, the big guns and the little guns. You know, it's a difference between like a mechanized infantry division and a spec ops team.
Yeah.
You know, when they all have their purpose. You know, and when you go in and do all the big stuff, which requires permits and licensing, that raises the interest of intrusive third and fourth world countries because they're looking for the money.
Sure.
So what you have to do is really kind of count your blessings and, you know, crawl, walk, run. I go in there and I scout and see the viability of this. And then if there is that, then you can take it to the next level. Because a lot of times people initially would come in and they would go through all the red tape and all the expense of bringing in big equipment, you know, rebreathers, lots of tanks, quad scan sonar, metal detectors, you know, just all the stuff. And that raises a lot of eyebrows. And a lot of times, you know, you haven't really necessitated that level of access. It's like, you know, to send in a mech division when a rec team should have gone in.
Sure.
You know, so that's really the kind of the same equivalent of, you know, learning what's out there and then making that effort. And that really, when we get to that stage, my Borgenge Bay, Cape Gloucester, 1st Marine Division, Assault Landing, and 5th Air Force, and the historical aspects of the wrecks and the fact that they're in that little basket that is Borgenge Bay, that's what makes it so cool, because it's not just metal on the bottom, it's real stories.
Wow. Are y'all bringing them up or just finding them, documenting, taking pictures? Are you taking anything out?
No, I don't. People do.
Sure.
I don't really believe in that because of the context. Once the sea has claimed certain things, bringing them up is just a fool's game. Once they hit the air, they oxidate and they almost just crumble before you.
Really?
Some of these things are literally being kept in stasis by the accretions that are on them, no longer the metal.
Wow.
So it's the coralline structures, the encrusting sponges, the calcates, all kinds of things just adhere to structure in the sea.
Yeah.
And especially, hardened metals are just aluminum all but, turns to powder and just,
right.
But once again, it's the context. These things, a lot of times, even if, men were not lost, men were injured, and that was their tool of war.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it now is where it is and how it looks and how that is representative of the war fighters, whether they were the enemy or ours.
When you find remains, do they leave remains as well, or will they because you have to report that, right?
Well, we touched on that earlier. When we talked on the phone, there's a group called JPAC,
okay,
and they're out at Hickam, and they're based in the Pacific because there's more men and ships and aircraft missing from World War II in the Pacific than all other wars combined.
Wow!
So they are basically ready with a team, and the people that know what they're doing, such as my teams. If you find remains or even things that can be like jewelry or something that can be tracked to an individual, all operations are ceased, and you contact JPAC with the lat longs, any data you have, and then they come and they do their thing. Once they extract the remains or anything that they deem necessary, they then will approve further investigative
right.
diving or whatever it is. And so that's...
How quick do they respond? That sounds like a major pain in the ass if you're sitting around. We have like, hell, we found a bracelet. We've got to stop working, and everything stops for the day, and you start losing money, right?
Not really, because once again, my thing is the story, and with all things giving back, and there's, even though it's 70, 80 years now,
yeah,
there's some people that have unfinished business, stories that have not been told. And now with everything that we've been doing, and, social media, iPhones, podcasts, the data is just so fire hose. But back then, things took a long time. And
have you been able to notify some families of?
I myself have not yet. I actually have that in my quiver because of some of the things that I am looking for.
Yeah.
There's some significant, Mount Rushmore level warfighters that are in that matrix.
Who are you looking for?
Well, there's one this is so Texas, it's crazy. Brigadier General Walker. It's the highest ranking officer killed in World War II in that theater. He was the commander of 5th Bomber Command, and he was riding in as observer in a B-17 Foxtrot F, and the name of the ship was the San Antonio Rose, painted on her nose.
Wow.
And she went missing over Rabaul on an area that really people don't know if she's in the water or on land, but that's a historical nugget. And the commander of the aircraft was the major, who was really one of the major squadron commanders over in that area. And he himself was lost. Well, they were both posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
Because this was one of those things early on. This happened in 1942. So this was early on.
Why do they think it could be on land?
Because there's more men and ships and aircraft, well, not ships so much, but aircraft and men lost from weather in New Guinea than enemy combat. You have 14 to 17,000 foot mountains that shoot out of the sea with the wind and conditions sub-equatorial, 3 to 5 degrees south of the equator. The weather systems are stunning.
Wow.
A couple of times my dad, he would do, well, hell, I wasn't going to follow him into that cloud. I knew there was a hard center, because he'd be on fighter pilot talk. I was getting pieces of him. He was knocking them off, but he went into that cloud and I wasn't going in there. I knew there was a hard center, because they did.
Wild.
But the point is there's aircraft are being found routinely over there, and primarily due to the terrain and weather. But, that's one of the things that's my responsibility as an expedition leader. I conceive of, plan, and lead these things. So I know those variables going in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it happens, I don't know when the hell that's going to happen. When we find it, I know what we're looking at. So I will go down and investigate. And having been involved in this and on numerous occasions, I know, because I'm good at buoyancy control and penetration and not disturbing areas, you can go in there and you kind of look around and kind of see.
Have you gone interior on some ships that you found?
Oh, yeah. So that's called penetrating.
Yeah. What ships?
Japanese cargo ships, a Japanese subchaser, Japanese
what's the
midget
size?
submarine.
What are a Japanese midget? So
Yeah.
you stopped me there for a second.
I knew that one gets you.
Is the submarine a midget, or were the Japanese in the submarine midgets?
You can go to the Nimitz Museum in Fredericksburg and actually see the one that ran up on shore during the Pearl Harbor attack. I dived on one in Kavieng up in the Soy Islands. It was adjacent to a tender. Well, the 345th Bomb Group came in, strafed and bombed this tender. They didn't even know the damn midget sun was over there until the intel photos showed this thing sitting there. Well, what they did was they scuttled it. So she just sank, sitting on the bottom in about 80 feet of water. It's one of the coolest dives I've ever been on. Has the torpedoes in the nose still.
And so is it a small sub, or is it a sub that's run by Japanese midgets?
Yeah. Back in the day, they would have thought the same. My dad, up to his dying day, still called them Japs.
Yeah.
It's just, how it is. But
yeah,
but no, it's a full size. It was a C. It's called the C type, and it was a 3-man crew. And it was basically, for lack of a better term, not necessarily suicidal, but more or less of a one-way mission kind of deal. The one that's on display in Fredericksburg at the Nimitz was washed up on the shore in Oahu from the Pearl Harbor attack. Wow. But it's the exact same model that's in Kavieng. So it's really cool. I have video of me, sitting I took my fins off and, stuffed myself in the little conning tower, and I'm sitting there like I'm, at sea, and it's at night too. So the video is really cool. But yeah, that was a neat one. And
what does the interior of these ships look like? Is it just covered in dirt? Are you seeing like bedrooms or like it had been
all
preserved?
The above. It really depends on how she's laying. Okay. A lot of times ships, especially with very narrow keels like destroyers and things like that, they tend to roll over on the side. They don't really sit upright. Whereas if you have more of your trawler hulls, like cargo ships, a lot of times they're sitting on the bottom, just like they were underway, maybe listing a little bit. That enables you to penetrate more, because what happens over time, structures, they degrade from the inside out through the corrosion, and exhaust bubbles can enhance the degradative process, the oxygenation, causes rust and everything.
Yeah.
So you really got to be careful. The same skill sets that are really used in cave diving are used in wreck diving. It's called controlled environment or overhead environment. Mm-hmm. And very much like deep diving, you have a real ceiling that you cannot go above for decompression purposes. So there's a discipline to it. And I have a lot of cave diving buddies. I've always been frustrated because the skill sets are the same. Mm-hmm. They have no interest in the ocean and wreck. Some of them are hyper prone to seasickness.
Really? That's funny.
And of course, I'm a wreck guy.
Yeah.
I really don't like caves. I've done some cave stuff, but I'm like...
Caves scare me. I love wrecks. Wrecks are fun. It looks like something haunted. Like being down. I've probably done about 20 dives in my life, and wrecks are my favorite by far.
Well, you're military, and once again, the cool thing about wrecks, they're human. Mm-hmm. They're made by men, driven by men, flown by men, and then lost by men. And sometimes men are lost in the process. Whereas caves are a work of God. They're cool. I've done a lot of cave diving, but I was never afraid, or I was more like I wasn't really comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's like being in the military. You take a nookie out of a dude and, little 30-year-old and say, go be in spec ops, go play football, do mixed martial arts. You got to want to do these things.
Sure.
So that is, the wreck thing is my deal because of the history. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough, all roads lead back to my dad.
Yeah.
I was very, very lucky. I was not spoiled, but I was very privileged.
What was your dad like?
He was the best. Gabby was very cool. And
was that his name, Gabby?
That was his call sign, Gabby.
Oh, okay.
He had 20/10 vision, and he'd call out bogeys. And, hell, there's nothing out there. Wipe off your windscreen. There's nothing out there. And then, because fighter pilots are known for having good eyes. Okay. My dad was even, he really, really good vision. But he got his name because he didn't talk a lot. He was a sergeant before the war. He was actually in airborne infantry. They were developing a 23 millimeter cannon that could be airdropped with the airborne guys going into D-Day, because all they had was grenade launchers and, things like, they didn't have any real artillery of any kind. Yeah. So this 23 millimeter they could use as an anti-tank weapon, but they couldn't use the same trolley system and the big armor panel. So they had basically stripped the damn thing down and made it air deliverable. And that's, my dad was doing that before the war. They were developing these processes, and his battery commander kept losing his records because my dad was applying for aviation. He wanted to be a pilot. That's why he went into the military in 1938 when he graduated from high school. And the war happened. The battery commander kept losing his papers. He went to the motor pool, requisitioned a Jeep, took his papers over to Moffett Field, was accepted into flight training, and the rest is history. As a warfighter, you'll like this little caveat. After the war, my dad was at the Pentagon, and he's walking through the little garden there, and one of his old mates saw him and turned white like a sheet. He thought my dad was dead, and he knew him because my dad was very unique. And he just really right there told my dad, because he was in personnel, the unit that my dad was with the artillery unit, their C-47 was blown out of the sky the night before D-Day.
Wow.
So my dad could have been on that same aircraft and I wouldn't be here, And the same thing is true, full circle back, as a dogleg near the end of the war. My dad was being trained to lead a fighter squadron of P-51s for the invasion of Japan. And he had 4 victories. With 5, you become an ace. So the bombs dropped. The invasion never happened. My dad never went back over for a second tour and never got his 5th victory. So the joke in the family was, hell, he would have even gone over there, become an ace, or I wouldn't be here. So it was a really weird period to be associated with. And because of my father, I was associated with all the great fighter pilots in the Air Force at that time, in the ETO too. Myers and, Gabreski and all these guys were buddies of my dad. So I got to hear all their stories and I grew up with that. And if you ask them something, they wouldn't say anything. So I had to eavesdrop at bridge parties and dinner clubs when I was on a 6 and, and then there was swarms everywhere. And, you really got to hear the stories then. Yeah, they were really didn't want to talk about it, So.
Was he very open with you about stuff like that?
Not when I was a kid. I was a little, too full of myself as a child and running around playing football and chasing girls and all that. Yeah. But when I became really interested in the history after I graduated, he became more disclosive, as did his close friends. My godfather was the operations officer for the headhunters, and they didn't even know each other when they were over in the same theater. They became best lifelong friends.
Who were the headhunters?
The 80th Fighter Squadron. They were the famous P-38 unit over there. They were involved in the Cape Gloucester mission. They had more aces and more triple aces than any other squadron in the theater.
Wow.
Really, really hot unit, as they called it back then. P-38s were the aircraft of choice in that theater, kind of like the Corsair was the theater, aircraft of choice in the South Pacific, which was Halsey's gig over in the Solomons. MacArthur was in charge of the Southwest Pacific, and that was an all Air Corps gig, except for the invasion of Gloucester, by the way, where the 1st Marine Division was hand selected by MacArthur to come in and do the invasion because he wanted the old breed. Were you ever in the first? Did you ever serve with the first? Or
I was with 2-7. I think I was first. I think I was 1st Marine Division.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, being a student of history and a fan of all things military, the patch of the 1st Marine Division is a 1, and it says Guadalcanal.
Yep.
Right down it. Did you hear last year that a flagged American vessel, a Coast Guard cutter, was denied portage in Honiara in the Solomon Islands?
No.
Because of the Chinese?
Really?
Yeah. First time in history that an American flagged vessel.
What's the Chinese doing calling shots over there?
That's the question, isn't it? That's the Westpac. What they're doing, it's like their Bridges and Roads program. They're going over into compromised or otherwise influential countries, primarily 3rd, 4th world countries, and doing the deed,
Wow.
And we had one of our Coast Guard cutters pulled into Honiara, which is where Henderson Field and where the 1st Marine, all that stuff happened. And they were denied portage, and my blood boiled,
What was their reasoning?
They didn't really give any. It was the Chinese have come into the Solomon Islands, and they're doing the boats and ridges. They built a port there. They had their own vessels. So now the Chinese are really taking over that whole Westpac area. It's not just Taiwan. It's the Philippines. It's Korea. It's Malaysia. They're really doing.
You've been seeing this recently?
I've been seeing it for years.
Wow.
It's happening right before your eyes.
What do you think they're doing?
Well, they're incurring into the area. They want the Makassar Straits. They want the oil, the lumber. The sea provides, and the jungle provides some of the number 1 pharmaceuticals, and especially the developmental ones that are yet to be discovered. And Indonesia and that whole Southeast Asia thing, those are the spice isles of lore back in the Great A. Nutmeg, all that stuff came from that area. So the reason that the Japanese incurred into that area, and kind of another track here that has to do with the strategy of World War II, was called the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, and Asia for the Asians. Very anti-imperialistic, because of the actual imperialistic actions, if you will, of the 1800s and the early 1900s. But unlike other entities, including the British Empire, we've always been very accommodating, as we did at the end of World War II when we had taken over the planet. We rebuilt China, we rebuilt Japan, we rebuilt Russia, we rebuilt Germany. China and Russia inadvertently, Germany and Japan directly, were rebuilt by us. So it's really seeing those incursions, like in the Spratly Islands, where they're dredging up coral reefs and making bases and airports and naval bases.
The Chinese are?
The Chinese are, yeah. They're now incurring into the Philippine Islands. Are
these host nations complicit, or is this an act of war we're just not hearing about?
Well, if all things are special, nothing is. Once again, it's the Kardashian piercings and, what's going on in other parts of the world. Very political here. I'm very apolitical, by the way, but I'm very aware socioeconomic wise. The Chinese are emulating the path of the Japanese in World War II. They're literally doing the Line Island thing, the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, and they're trying to control trade routes. The Makassar Straits and the Straits of Singapore. 80% of global trade goes through those regions at some time. And it's flying under the radar. And in a political context, the Chinese are the reason for everything. Even the technology that is being provided to Iran to create instability in the world is all being propagated by China. North Korea is just the pit bull of China. They wouldn't even function without China doing something. So, the political aspects are really very evident, and when you go to these areas like East Africa, and not so much the Pandemic region, which is incurring there too, as we know, we gave the Panama Canal over to the Chinese.
Really?
Yeah, under Clinton. Yeah, we were the administrators of the Panama Canal, and we gave the administration of them over to China. So China runs the Panama Canal now.
Wow. I don't know how I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, it's crazy, dude.
I thought we gave it back to Panama.
I could talk politics a lot with you, but I know that's a different subject. But it's one of the things that I draw because people need to be aware.
Well, you're out there seeing these things, and I mean, if the news doesn't tell us now, we don't know. And if the news doesn't say it and social media doesn't say it, we really don't know. And so,
the China's Bridges to Roads program, it's their, if you will, they're trying to make it sound like it's a philanthropic effort that they're here to help these poor.
They're real altruistic.
Yeah, they're very altruistic. Yeah,
most governments are
to their own baby girls.
They're just there to help the people.
But they're going in and they're building airports and ports for ships and all this kind of stuff, and they're building at a very high standard. For the trained eye, these are not what's required for local trade. Mm-hmm. They're dredged deep enough for high draft vessels, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's funny how in World War II, they were our ally, meaning the Chinese, and Japan was our enemy. As a caveat to this whole conversation, one of the things that burned when my house burned, I had my dad's graduation album from Class 43C from Luke Field in Arizona, leather bound with the AT-6 Texans in formation.
Yeah.
The very last name of the Americans in the list of the graduates, Charles Chuck Yeager.
Really?
Flip the page, Chinese. All Chinese people. We brought them over here, trained them to fly fighters when it was a real big deal to fly a fighter, stick and rudder and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Smoke in your face and, open cockpit. Gave them guns, gave them ammunition, fuel, and fighters, and sent them back over there to fight the Japanese.
Kind of like we did with the with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah. The Mujahideen.
Yeah. How many times are we going to do that?
It's
dance.
Well, it's you guys that do it, man.
Well, we respond and show up, I guess. It was a good time, I suppose.
Well, it's about service, Zach, and that's what you did. And I enjoy telling the story of the warfighters, and the great thing about my expeditions in general to all the regions, but primarily this one that I'm trying to focus on with you, is New Guinea. And if you can put yourself in position that you were as a young guy going to the service.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being a farm or a ranch guy, early 40s, don't even have a driver's license? They pick you for flight training. You go through flight training, and now you're flying P-38s or Corsairs or P-40s, 20,000 feet, 400 miles an hour on the other side of the world in paradise, you know? And now
sounds both terrifying and awesome as fuck.
Yeah. Well, then my dad said that he was more fearful from weather than anything. You know, he would come back from missions, and they'd have to be brought on each other's tail and find a hole, as they would say, and spiral through it because these clouds would just build up and you could see them rise. The weather in that part of the world is just crazy.
Wow.
You know,
so just flying through clouds, and I guess people were just crashing because of the weather.
Yeah, but it's just the paradigm of being that American ranch farm boy, rural dude from the 30s and 40s. Now you're over New Guinea.
It's like going to another planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell people that are more of the new generations. It's like Star Wars. You know, that's the paradigm shift of that period will not happen again until we have Star Wars like stuff, because World War I planes top speed, you know, go fly to 10,000 feet at 120 miles an hour.
Yeah.
By World War II, you had reconnaissance P-38s flying 450 miles an hour at 40,000 feet, you know. And a historical note that I think you'll like is the Wright brothers' first flight was in 1903, December 18th. My dad's first combat victory was December 25th, 1943. 40 years from the time we had first, you know, heavier than air controlled air flight.
Yeah.
40 years later, my dad's in New Guinea shooting down Japanese.
Yeah.
That's just
first thing we're going to do is find a way to kill each other with it, right?
Oh,
every new technology.
Well, it's funny. Thank God for the space race, you know, because we took our fighter jockeys and turned them into astronauts.
Yeah.
You know, and that's giving back. But I know you guys, I've been around, you know, a lot of war fighters in my life, and you're a different breed, different critters, you know, having had to do what you've done and done it so well and weathered everything. And I think that it's a very, very inspiring for younger generations, especially now, to understand and appreciate those things and see the continuity of how history repeats itself.
Yeah.
That's why I went on that path with China and Japan. When you really get into this to the level that I am, all the little nuance.
Do you think we'll see another Pearl Harbor then?
I think we already did.
Really?
Yeah.
When?
COVID.
Oh, well, okay. The Chinese virus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did COVID affect you?
I don't know. I probably had it 20 times and never knew it. You know, it affected me, you know, with business. That was really what happened is, you know, as we were talking about Terra, my expeditions that I had planned and, you know, had really been planning from 17 and 18, it takes a while. It's not like a trip, you know, let's go see the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, cool. You know, you got to literally put a lot of time and effort into this. There's logistics, getting people, systems, vessels, resorts, lodging, investors, you name it. I mean, just there's a lot involved with it. So you have to, you know, a fast one's 9 months, and that's just like, you know, almost instant. Generally, it takes a year or two to plan these things properly to get them out there. And that's really what happened. I had all my guns lined up, man. I had, you know, each quarter was full. I had all these great expeditions going, and then boom, right when I was popping, you know, 2020 was when all those, that calendar year of 2020 was going to be all those expeditions that I was telling you about, you know, East Africa, you know, Equatorial East Africa, Pandemic region, Melanesia, and all gone.
Wow.
And I'm you know, really free diver, really fit, you know, clean haircut, you know, all this. So this is my protest.
Nice.
You know, I mean, I if you could see photos of me in 2019 and early 2020, clean cut, you know, swimming a lot, fit, you know, and then when the bottom came out, it was depressing.
Really?
Know? Not only for myself.
Did you stay in Wimberley? Where did you go?
When?
Went during COVID when all
Well,
of those.
Cecilia and I split and went to California.
Oh, you went to California.
We drove into California. We drove
Really?
in. They were saying, they're shutting the state down. And we just went,
Yeah.
we hung out in Coronado. We were hanging out in Coronado with friends. We went up to Malibu.
Must have been quiet there because it feels like they all came here during
Well, they
COVID.
are, yeah. Absolutely. It's one of my jokes I always say, the problem with California, it's full of Californians.
Yeah. Same as the Scots, right?
Yeah.
I know that movie.
Yeah. But it was interesting. We spent on the road. We just lived on the road because I was so bummed with that. And she had some issues occur in her life path and family. And we just said to hell with it, man. She hadn't seen a lot of these places. So I took her on the one from Imperial Beach, and the one only, not 101 or 105 or the 5 or anything, all the way creeping along the coast, all the way up to past Bodega Bay.
Wow.
Back.
That's a beautiful drive.
Oh, yeah. The Cabrillo and Highway 1. Oddly enough, 2 weeks after we went there, one of those big floods came through and sloughed off Rat Creek and shut down the one right where we had driven by. We were down in Malibu hanging at a friend's house, and that year they had those huge rains. That was that year that here they called it the snowpocalypse or whatever. And so we were out of state, primarily in California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, because she had never really taken in that part of the world, and I was beyond bummed. I was just like, I had all this
just distracting yourself,
and all my clients and buddies and veterans, longtime clients, providers, my buddies over in New Guinea and Africa. I mean, it was just, people were shocked, and I'm, just the side of feral and hyper alpha. I was like, this is bullshit, this is freaking bullshit.
Yeah.
It's all bullshit. And then they shut the planet down, and, I was, a lot to deal with. But,
so you kind of view COVID as the newest Pearl Harbor from China.
It's the first salvo in World War III. Absolutely. If you're a student of history,
yeah,
every war from World War I, because that's really all that matters. Before that, there were regional conflicts between chiefdoms and city states and whatnot. World War I and World War II were precursed by huge levels of instability, inflation, social strife.
Yeah.
The anti-Semitism stuff that we see going on right now, all this, it's a pool of things. And as a student of history, my degree is in history from UT. Look out.
We'll count it. It's fine.
Yeah. At least it's not basket weaving, man. I was talking about doing underwater basket weaving,
Yeah.
But being a true student of history, you understand these things. It's a sine wave. We are humans, and we are creatures of habit. Or we would not be having this conversation.
Sure.
So, it's my opinion, but I think it's a very, insightful when you see the instability that's created around the world and how China is at the forefront of everything. China's behind terrorism. They're behind Russia. They're behind North Korea. North Korea is just their pit bull.
Really?
And, North Korea's population is less than the state of Texas, and they're about the size
starving,
of they're about the size of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
they have a huge amount of natural resources, especially that relate to our new energy, EV stuff, up in those mountains that border China and Russia. There's a huge series of mountains, very mineral rich, but they don't have the capacity to extract it. Therefore, China and Russia do. It's just like in the Korean War, we were really not fighting the North Koreans, we were fighting the Chinese and the Russians.
What do you think China's trying to gain? I mean, is there really a world domination scheme going on by any one nation leader, or they just want to be the superpower, or strategizing for the sake of doing it?
Well, I don't know. You're an amazing young man and a war fighter and all the things that in that we are creatures of habit, and you look back through time all the way to Thermopylae and the emergence of the Macedonian state and Greek becoming integrated and their battles with the Persian empires and the Etruscans and their battles with the Russians, and just Carthage, and you look at war. I mean, you have all these conspiracy theorists now that the chemtrails and the Illuminati and all that, but it's always just been a struggle for resources and hearts and minds. And China has a long worldview. They have been very contributive to the world state, if you will, through history, through various capacities, with intellectual pursuits, warfare, technology, and they want that again. And what they had to go through at the end of last century, the end of the 1800s, the entry of the 1900s, was one of those instability periods. See, World War I and World War II are really one war that were separated by a kind of a truce, if you will. What happened in World War II was unsettled business of World War I, and these instabilities that you see socially, economics, social tension, division, you're not me, therefore I don't like you. One of the things when you travel, dude, it's terminal to prejudice. And everybody always says that, but I've been to 111 countries. I've been circumnavigated the world by air and by sea. I am so atypical and non-political and non-prejudicial. What I don't like is corruption. And really that's what goes on in these regions that we're really and always have been juxtaposed, and that you yourself has had to put you and your loved ones and your life on the line. Is these concepts, East versus West. Are we right or they right,
Where do you think the mass migration, the global migration that's going on, plays in with history? In this repetition, this cycle that we're doing, where have we seen that in the past, and what did it lead to?
Well, there's always pushes, and it's always, once again, resources and either the desire for resources and expansion or the sequestration of resources, like the Irish famine, that led, people to migrate over here, the opening up, when people migrated from Europe and from Asia in the 1800s, this was a land of opportunity, as we know, and there was work to be had and land to be had and resources, et cetera. Now with the stratification that we have, nation states, jet aircraft, space, everything's just accelerated. So we're in a pressure cooker because of technology and resources that we don't have the capacity to understand, because our rate of technological advancement has usurped
too fast
who we are as people.
Yeah.
But we got to love each other, man, and realize that division is the work of the powers that be. And once again, going back to history, historically, the 1800s or the 19th century was the era of the emerging colonial powers that was really seated in Europe. The Germans, the Dutch, the French, the British. We were still a developing nation, more or less, kind of still babies in the 1800s. The 1900s were really, once again, a new manifestation of that, but now was centered on the U.S. Our resources, our mojo, our capacity, our technological prowess, manifest destiny, the ethos of a very holistic, moralistic nation at the time was very rural. Now we've urbanized, the world has grown tenfold, but these stresses are still there. So when you study the sine wave of what precurses actual war, that's what we were in.
Do you think it'll turn into an actual physical war, or have we progressed to more of a cyber war?
I think that's it. It's like, aviation was a big deal.
Yeah.
War II, because it was new. Now it's the ether and space,
economic
and technology,
warfare,
and AI, and all these things that we really can't grasp yet, and biological and chemical warfare. It's my tenet, and I hold very strong to that what China did was an overt act of, they killed their own baby girls. What makes you think they care about their own people or us?
Yeah.
And they loosed this virus, which is a manifestation of the Frankenstein factor, let's create something, this desire to move and go forward, and unfortunately that's where we're at. But, that's not giving up, you're still here, I'm still here, we're still here, and it's up to us to do good and to show light. Being aware of the things we're discussing is good, but you can't let them control your life. You still have to go forward. Love your family, love your life, love your friends, do good, go to FTW, show people how to put it on, 1,000 yards down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not a misery thing. It's an awareness thing. And by being aware, you can show that awareness to these people, whoever they are nefariously, and stand together.
Do you feel like you're pretty aware of that COVID situation, what China was trying to do? How did you filter out all the media, all the shit that was being said, all the scare tactics? These people are dying. Because I remember first hearing, like, thousands and thousands of people are dying in China. And I was just flying back from Kabul. I'd gone through Dubai. I was going, international travel. Yeah. My wife's like, stand by for the Lysol bath before you step into house. I'm like, well, what the fuck's going on? Like, is this for real? Or is this, because every week there's a crisis.
Oh,
you know what I mean? It's a 24/7 political telenovela, where the media just promotes their favorite characters so they're not voted off the island every 4 hours, and feeds whatever shit feeds ratings, because that's how they get paid.
Absolutely.
And so how did you navigate the storm of international media to feel like you understood what was going on and that this was a malicious attack by China?
Well, all roads lead back to Gabby. He taught me how to think. Cause effect, linear thought. If things don't make sense, there's a reason, and you need to look into that farther. And we are in a world of planned obsolescence and plausible deniability, and that's no more manifest anywhere than in politics and international intrigue. So I just used common sense. I mean, I don't get the flu shot. I haven't had the flu. I haven't been sick in any substantial way, and I don't know when. I'm 62 years old and healthy as a horse. Never got the vaccine, not get the vaccine, didn't wear masks. I am the poster child to the rebel.
What do you say to the people that did get sick, that had, wore the masks and did the vax and still got sick and,
Well, live and learn. That linear thought cause effect thing. When you actually can apply logic, you look at these things, and to use as a beating boy, the flu shot, they do this thing every year as a strain, and then it's never effective. Well, not never, but rarely effective. 20% of the time.
Well, that's the out, right? It's a strain. If you still get it, then you must have caught a different one, right?
Well, but now it's all come around, to be on the COVID thing. Not really dwell on this negative aspect of everything, but, it's really being aware geopolitically and socioeconomic what's going on, that we can get into the pathological, stuff. I'm not a pathologist. I'm not an immunologist, but I can read and I can understand cause effect. And, the wet thing from a bat and all this stuff. Meanwhile, they're doing gain of function research, which is a fancy way of saying taking something that's bad, engineering it so it's even worse, and making it more transmittable to humans. So, that's
what
that
possible good reason would you have?
Why? What's the reason?
That's a pretty dangerous one.
And of course, it was done in Wuhan.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody pretty much knows now what happened and agrees that this was I don't know if it was an intentional thing, but it certainly did happen, right? Well, we can assume an intention, but I don't know that it was, but it did come from there, and it was.
Yeah, but I mean, when you couple things, that's what it's the frog in the water. You've heard that thing about, you
slowly cook it.
Yeah. It's that because people are busy living their lives. You have kids.
Yeah.
You got to be showing people how to put stuff down range. Then you fly in here to do this thing with me, and everyone's like that. They don't have time to sit around and analytically analyze all these things that are going on. We're drinking from a freaking fire hose.
I'll tell you the thing about it that made me the most suspicious was simply how hard they pushed it.
Yep.
If it had been a strip of text along the bottom, new virus found that's killing everybody. If you see your doctor, you can get a vax. Next on the news, I'd have been like, what was that?
Right.
Like, maybe I need to look into that. But when they're pushing it as hard as they're pushing it, and maybe it's just the rebel, with that we have. Like, it's part of my personality to question and need validation before I'm going to do it. But man, they pushed it so hard. I was like, there's no fucking way.
Well,
There's
the whole
no way.
because things like that, you know, they are viral pathogens that are passed through aerosolic dispersal through the air.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing the whole wipe things down and wear a mask, which can go through the pores of a mask.
Sure.
And masks were designed for dentists, EMTs, and doctors when they have your body open and they're sticking their face in it.
Yeah.
It's not for you not to get something, you know. So the whole thing didn't make sense. So,
and it got corrupted by politics, as most anything does. The moment politics touches it, that it just goes.
That's why I try to stay. I mean, and oddly enough, this conversation has gone into that. But to me, it's more of a socioeconomic cursor and precursor to strife, because instability leads into war, and that goes back to the expeditions. You know, why I want to be there and tell the story, and use these beautiful imagery and storylines of discovery and science to enlighten people, to show them that there's more to life. So many of the people that I interact with think everything's been done and that, you know, you can't do anything new. And, you know, I joke with a lot of my friends, you know, skiing sideways, backwards, blindfolded across the Antarctic because normal's already been done.
Yeah.
So what I've chosen to do is do science. And I'm not talking about, one of my biggest pet peeves is science has been corrupted by the freaking commies.
Right.
They've come in and the red-green agenda has usurped actual conservation. Teddy Roosevelt, who was a, you know, Rough Riders and president of the United States, he's one of the original New Age thinkers of what actual conservation is. And I consider myself a conservationist. I've been to reefs and rainforests that need to be protected. If all things are special, nothing is. And the agenda that has become a social movement that I believe has been taken over by communist and social agendas is degrading actual conservation.
How are they doing that?
They're trying to control the mechanisms of that, and they're trying to channel protections into areas that have already been degraded for their own purposes versus actually protecting pure virgin stands of forest or reef that are out there that need to be protected before they're degraded. There's always an agenda, and when you boil it down, not all, but the majority have this path.
You think they're falsely preserving areas for resource acquisition, or that don't really have the natural, I don't know, animals or whatever they're trying to conserve? You think they're just picking areas because there's a resource advantage to that?
There could be, but I think it's not that, you know, egalitarian or Machiavellian at all. It's the human nature to be selfish. A lot of agendas are driven not by what needs to be conserved, but by the kickback that they get. You know,
the grants and the money for
and greasing of the palms, not just in the old classical sense of give me a buck here, give me a buck there, but favors, agendas where the attrition is such that places that really need to be focused on, that are out of sight, out of mind, that's where that little critter that's going to cure cancer is. You know, I'm a very generic statement, but
sure.
I believe conservation stands on its own. It doesn't need to be political. It doesn't need to be left-wing, right-wing, conservative, liberal, you know, none of this. It is what it is. The planet is in and of itself of value.
I mean, the fight, I guess, would start in who decides what to conserve, right?
Yeah.
What's to conserve and what's to consume?
Well, look at the EV thing. Going full circle back to ocean exploration. There are these things called manganese nodules, and they're primarily like whale's teeth and shark's teeth that have fallen through the abyssal plain tens of thousands, millions of years ago, and now they've had this accretion around them. And these accretions have the highest concentration of the trace minerals that are utilized for battery production. So instead of having to go rape the land and dig up all these areas that they're doing in Niger with the slave trade, you hear about all this horrible stuff about cobalt and the various things they're trying to extract from various soils. These aren't big nuggets. They're very rarefied. So they have to slurry it. Slurries where they take the aggregate, they put it in water, they run stuff through it, including chemicals that leach the active stuff out, and then all that stuff runs into the rivers and into the ocean. these manganese nodules are sitting down basically in the abyssal plain about 18 to 17,000 feet underwater with very little endemic species. Now, there are very unknown critters down there, and this is where I get into kind of a conflict with my conservation crowd. We really don't know what's down there, but the photic zone, which is about 100 meters up, is where 90% of marine life is.
Yeah.
So in these benthic abyssal plains that we have, these accretions, they're littered over the ocean, thousands of acres. It's weird when you see the pictures, almost like they were put there like chess pieces. And they accrete, and they're known as manganese nodules. And they're the technology where they want to go down, basically vacuum these things up, and then grind them up, slurry them out, and they don't have to use the chemicals because of the type of accretion it is. So they just use the existing seawater where they crush it up, and then the detritus falls down. Well, the deep water people are freaking out over that. You know,
What is their concern?
that we're going to rape an environment that has not been adequately investigated yet. And there's some truth in that. But my point is, we know what the Congo is. We know what the reef systems, the coastal, it's called littoral, meaning littoral is a term scientifically for near shore.
Yeah.
And those areas, the pelagic and epipelagic and littoral regions, especially the benthic zones there, benthic is bottom, are attrited by all the stuff that we do. And that affects us directly.
Yeah.
These deep water ones where we can go in and access them, they might be the solution because there's this big push to go EV, and the whole battery conversation is another thing, because that's one of the things I've done is I understand BTUs and battery, input, output, storage capacity. Our collective capacities from wind and solar have gotten better. The panels are better, more efficient. The battery and the control mechanisms are still the problem. Then you have to get, how do you make batteries, right? That's that manganese nodule thing. So do you want to go get things that are sustainable in the next century, or do you just not want to do it? Because what we're going to have is a huge resource problem.
Well, you're going to have a shift in the supply source if you shift that over. And I'd imagine there's going to be some kickback on that.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of those things are these called donut holes.
Yeah.
They're regions that are beyond the EEZ, exclusive economic zone of any nation. And a lot of those are out in the middle of the Pacific. They happen to be also correlated to where those manganese nodules.
You could end up tapping a whole industry or kicking something off if people see y'all doing that. What stops anyone else from doing it?
Well, right now there's two consortiums. One is a Aussie British company, and the other is a Canadian company. And they're the ones that are actually developing the technologies. Friggin', it's like shit out of Avatar. These big, giant, look like pool cleaners that go on the bottom of the ocean with
a vacuum cleaner with an 18,000 foot extension cord.
Yeah. And they go through and they suck this stuff up.
Wow.
But my point is that's sustainable and non-degradative with relating to comparing to the other technologies. Because what we're doing right now in Asia and China, and where they found, I don't know if you heard, up in Wyoming or Nevada, recently they found a big
cobalt mine?
Yeah.
Wow.
And not because cobalt, but the other, I should be more efficient with this. I know these things, but I'm losing it right now on the actual variables. There's a series of 3 or 4, maybe 5 minerals like cobalt, lithium, things like that are utilized in the process of developing these batteries. And that goes to me right at the heart of conservation, because once that snowball goes down the hill, you aren't stopping it. So you might as well make that snowball go the track that you know is best, But that's some of the ancillary stuff that comes from exploration. And to it, really, Zach, it's kind of like the gold and the emeralds, because there's a resource there. That is a new emerging thing. In times of anarchy and apocalyptic stuff, a lodge, cooking plate is more valuable than a gold coin.
Sure.
So it's context and what you need when. And my track is, it's been kind of a dark conversation, but I like inspiration. I love people, and I want to show that there's stuff out there that brings us together. And the juxtaposition of finding historically significant wreckage that's in the coral triangle with all this growth on it, that is a pathway for scientists to investigate, learn, and improve the human condition. It's been very gratifying for me to do that. And I wish there was a way to share that in a broader context, because that path of success and joy is what fills life with meaning.
Yeah.
When I give presentations a lot, nature abhors a vacuum, and I look at bubbles. You have a big bubble up here, you're going to fill that bubble with productivity or love, because if you just leave it, it's going to be filled with something else, and that's not always good.
Yeah.
Because nature abhors a vacuum. So I go around filling my bubbles with love and purpose. And what we've discussed here, the socioeconomic stuff and all that, you're the man, so how we go. But our conversations could go so many different ways. But really the key, I think, in Zero Foxtrot, military service, uplifting people and all that, is that purpose. How can you inspire people? My son, who, is National Guard right now, he used to say to me, well, yeah, you were lucky you got to do all that. And I'm, well, son, you can do that too. I think a lot of the younger generations, they feel burdened by this world that we've given them and by the constraints that we have and horrible events like COVID and world stress and all that. We need to give them love and show them that there's stuff out there.
Yeah.
And going and doing in these areas and showing and sharing the brilliance that our planet is, I think is really the path that I want to go.
Do you feel like you've inspired your son?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I was shocked that he went right from high school. I told him, dude, man, you've had your parents and the school system and the coach, he played football, telling you what to do, man. Why don't you give yourself a year or two to breathe? Because I had no problem with him serving.
Yeah.
That dude signed up immediately. Straight track infantry.
Yeah.
Boom, boom,
What's he want to do with that?
Well, he's going to UTSA right now. He wants to get his medical degree or nursing degree.
Okay.
And he's infantry trained, sergeant, expert at everything. He's got he did all the stuff, really well. I think he might want to go back and go through PJ training, go through green feet, the what do they call it? The tunnel or the selection process for being a PJ, because he's patriotic. He's always wanted to serve. And like I said, my family's replete with warriors and explorers. So these
guys have it pretty good. I got to work with them a little bit in Afghanistan, and they were squared away dudes.
Yeah.
And they can do it all. Dive, jump, sniper school. They had it all.
Yes,
and a great budget to work with, which you don't really think about when you're signing up, but having been there, it matters.
Yeah.
The budget matters.
They had really nice lockers.
They had nice everything. They had like 10 lazy boys with 10 Xboxes and big screens along the wall in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I mean, they lived pretty good, but they worked hard too.
Oh,
and
well, they're y'all's firemen. They're there until the shit hits the fan, and then they got to go.
Yeah. Yeah, they were our QRF for our team that was out there running. And so, what are your hopes for your son for the military? Is he going to do the career? Is just a stepping stone? Do you want him to come and join you in your expeditions?
I would like to, and I had him doing all this stuff. I mean, my pool was 13 feet deep at my dive shop, and I called it my contraption. So as a young kid, he was just 5, 6 years old. He was going down at the bottom of the pool and tying on the knots, nice. Showing them, making sure they had the long, the tag, the ends were long enough, and doing square knots and bowlines and
that's cool.
Hitches and everything.
That's
cool. Little dudes, frogging down people. I got a lot of grief from the helicopter moms. I said, no, my dude's as drown proof as you can get. But he is of that. I love him and feel like we raised him right, and he's doing the good thing, man, but I don't know. I just, the world needs people like my boy, and hopefully he'll
figure it out.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I mean, at least not till I was, I don't know still now what I'm going to do when I grow up, right? Like I'm winging it. Every 4 years is kind of my rotation, I guess. Find something, explore it, figure it out.
Right.
Awesome. Cool. Now,
are you enjoying FTW and all that?
Yeah. It's been a great place to work. We have, new people coming in every week. I have no idea who's coming in most of the time. They're from all over the world. I also get to work with a lot of the tier 1 military sniper units come through there. And so that's really cool to get to, I don't know, see the gear they're using, be involved in their training, and kind of have my finger a little bit on the pulse of what's still going on.
Right.
It'll be 20 years, I guess, next year since I went to sniper school. And not a lot of guys get to even see what's going on with, their old units. There was 4 guys this last week that were from 2-7.
Yeah.
That, went on to the unit they were at. And so that was cool. Like running into them and it's like, we're from fuck the stumps. Like that place sucked, and get to spend a week with the guys again.
That's so cool.
It's what I think a lot of us miss. And it's what I miss the most out of getting out.
I can't imagine, because I always wanted that, but I never got to experience it. I mean, I played ball and, lead teams and all that, but nothing like military.
Yeah.
I mean, the esprit de corps and
it's the guys. The relationships that you made and the trauma bond of going through that suck together, The only guy that knows how bad it sucked is the buddy that was beside you, and that connection lasts forever. I don't think that ever ends.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love warfighters, and I come from them and wanted to be one, and the cards weren't in it. But I got to tell you I'm not a jock sniffer. I'm a helmet sniffer, as I said. I love military guys and love their stories. You've got
to be study the history and go to the places in the world that you've gone.
Well, it is a passion, and I was lucky, as we've stated. On the current military stuff, I went to SOFIC, which is the Special Operations Force Infantry Conference, or Industry Conference. It's always held at MacDill.
Okay.
There, because that's where, Joint Command is. Yeah. And it's a show and tell trade show for all the latest, greatest. You can't even take your phone or cameras in there because of all the stuff they have on the floor. Wow. And you have 75th Rangers and Raiders and, teams guys and PJs and CCTs all running around on the floor looking at all the greatest toys. I mean,
that sounds fun.
All the little, vehicles and all the guns and all the weird stuff. And there's something that hit the press just recently. And I told this happened in 2013. Weird old dude running around in a briefcase with a British accent, like something out of Bond or something. Pops this briefcase down, shows he can't take pictures, has this little, looks like an X-ray film thing. And he has a little 9-volt battery, and he goes chink, and he lays it down there and goes whoops, and then it disappears. It's like the Predator camouflage thing.
Really?
And there's just down the news the other day, I saw it, literally, it's now mainstream. They have panels that they're selling now where you can literally go stealth. It literally, like I could put it in front of you.
Invisibility cloaks, like Harry Potter.
They're little camera lenses that take the image from behind and reflect it up front. So it's like a camera to a TV. So I could put it in front of you and you'd freaking disappear and it'd look like that thing back there.
Why wouldn't the camera see you and present you on the...
I saw it and I didn't. This was in 2013 when I first saw it. So that was 11 years ago?
Yeah.
And this dude was so goofy. And the only thing in that case was that little piece of polymer and the little battery. And I had all these guys, just, how it is, a trade show. There's freaking Raiders and Rangers and just everybody in there. And we were about a dozen of us looking around, and he was like, we were at another dude's booth and he was showing us this shit. And
that's wild.
And you put your hand behind it and it would be at the table. The hand disappear. No, it's in the news. Google it. You'll check it out. It's crazy, but I was seeing it's like, like Predator, where you just.
Yeah. We're getting closer and closer to it. The Terminator is not far away.
Isn't that crazy?
Skynet's coming.
Well, as long as it doesn't become self-aware. That's one of these guys like you and I that do a little thinking. You got AI over here. You got robotics over here.
What stops it from being self-aware? Yeah. Good luck. I don't know. Seems like if we can, we have, and we go back later and question if we should have.
Well, you hit it right there, Zach. That's my point about Wuhan and what we were talking about earlier is we need to learn that just because we can, doesn't mean we should in all things, not just social, technical, and all that, because our advance has brought us to the point where we have podcasts and technology and everything, but it's how you use it, and I think that's going back to my OE stuff. That's really what drove me the passion to actually do something of significance and show that can still be done. And as a member of the Explorers Club and a fellow and a former chairman of the Texas chapter, I was able to run around with a lot of first-tier people. A lot of these guys are ex-military, and now they're big-time explorers,
How do you get into the explorer career path?
Well, the difference between exploration and recreation is that purpose thing, once again.
Right.
To go in as a fellow, as I did, you have to have written, presented TV work, documentaries. I did scouting for the BBC for their Blue Planet stuff. So there's meat on the bone. Yeah. You're not just going, I went and had a really good trip.
I like to hike.
Yeah.
Send me.
But, you're hiking with a purpose. That's really what the tenet of the Explorers Club, if you will, is to find and support the new emerging scientists, the young people, and to support field investigative sciences. So it's not just going out and shooting a rhino and calling yourself an explorer. That's actually counter to what we do. It is the purpose of the mission and having science at it. So as an explorer, I would say, for example, one of my shark expeditions that I did, I wanted to be an elasmobranchiichthyologist, as we talked about earlier. Colonel said,
Still
I love
don't know
you, son.
what you just said, but
I love you, son, but I'm not going to support you your whole life.
Yeah.
It's the study of sharks. And so one of my tenets from one of my flag expeditions to the Bahamas, for example, the purpose, was that I was really tired of seeing sharks hook and lined and brought on board vessels because the attrition rate is pretty high. Their organs really get crushed when they're put on boats, and they really can't take that stress. And as a diver and a free diver, you can get in the water and with a pole spear, put a satellite tag
in a shark.
Satellite tags pop off after a while. The actual instrument pop-offs and floats and transmits data. Anytime the shark breaches the surface while it's still on it, it's telemetry to satellites, and you can track them, salinity, temperature, motion, lat longs, the whole thing. But my tenet was that the passive tags, which they pull these damn sharks out of the water, lay them on the freaking deck, drill a hole through their dorsal fin, literally take a bolt and nut and put a tag on there that only has a number. It's called a passive tag. Well, these large groups of sharks are now small groups of sharks, but their morphology, meaning the structure of their fin, dents, cuts, breaches, and the pigmentation, the color of this specific shark species, the oceanic whitetip, is very much like great white sharks or humpback whales. They're identified by their unique markings on their pectoral fins and their dorsal fins. So the tenet of my expedition was that I could prove that you didn't have to do this. So these tagged sharks have the tag on them. And over the 10 days that I was in the water with these guys, I was taking pictures, and you can literally see day 1, day 2, day 3, the same shark, because the coloration is the same, and the proof is the tag. It says 495, but you can see the morphology, which is cuts, breaks, the actual physical structure of the fins, primarily the little trailing edge of the dorsal, the one on top, and the pectorals, one on the side. And those patterns were very definitive. So you could literally see the color and the pigmentation and the structure, the morphology of the fins were adequate for descripting these sharks. So the passive tag was no longer valid. That was the tenet of my expedition. I said, I'm going to go and take pictures and prove that we don't have to hook and line these guys and cause their attrition, because we can get in the water and you do sat tags, boom, while they're swimming.
Yeah.
With a pole spear.
Yeah.
And that pops off, doesn't do any really, it's like a splinter to us. They barely notice it when they twitch and, shoot away when you do it. But
they don't complain verbally, so I'm sure it's fine.
No, I mean, I've done that. I've never done the passive tag. I've seen it done and I've seen the results of it. But they always kind of go, oh yeah, well we lose sometimes 20, maybe 30 or 40%. If these sharks are supposed to be protected and cherished and nourished.
Killing them trying to study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you love them, hug them to death there.
All right.
But so my tenet, once again, to this flag was that by doing this documentary, you could actually track and then record individual sharks.
Right.
Well, 200 years ago, there were 1,000 of these things around one ship. Now you freak out and throw a party if you have 10 to 15 around you. Well, those small numbers lend themselves to photographic study. And that was the tenet of what my expedition
So
was.
because there's so few, you can just take photos and ID these guys. It's not necessary to puncture them. And
Exactly.
Wow. What are some other concepts or innovative ways that you're trying to improve the research?
You mean the shark stuff, or
Any of it, any of the thing, like you're talking about using new battery technology that you're coming up with through Terra. This is a new, form of studying sharks. It's less invasive upon them. What are some other stuff?
I came up with the wasp and the bear. Those are my little acronyms. The wasp was what the warfighter carried on him for like snipers.
Who did?
The group was called FTL, Flexible Thin Film.
Oh, okay.
And it morphed into Terra.
All right.
So it's the same entity that morphed because, long story short, my guys went crazy. Instead of focusing on the small off-grid stuff that was marketable and had a pathway, they freaked out and wanted to go hard, crystalline, big, 500-acre solar things. And anyways, it's a long story, but my wasp and bear, the bear was a base system that was made for fobs and talks. So it had higher capacity and had truncates and batteries that were more stable to support forward operating bases, tactical operating centers, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the WASP was a little system that snipers or spec teams and all that. So my system had one charging, one ready, and one in the loop. And they reduced your battery load. So, you have to hump your brass and your batteries and all that shit. So my tenet was by reducing their battery load, they could carry more ammo, more MREs, whatever. I'm not a warfighter. So
any way you can lighten the load is appreciated.
Yeah. So that was what I was trying to do. And I developed this. It was called SIGS. It's a flexible film that can take a round through it and still work.
Wow.
So, your layup, how it is. You were a sniper, so you laying there sometimes for days, hours, or whatever. You roll this thing out. It was non-oblique, so it wouldn't be reflective, but it had a really good absorptive rate, so it would charge your batteries as you lay there, and then you just roll it up.
It's like a tactical solar panel.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can that be purchased? Is that on the market?
Well, it never happened because they went.
They wanted to go big, huh?
Yeah. Well, you gotta stay focused.
Yeah.
If you're all things to everyone, you're none to no one. And that stuck in my craw. And anyways, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But I had some good experiences. I went, it was 2013, 14, and 15. I was at SOFIC trying to, paddlefoot around there showing various entities. And because you got to go through all this freaking night. That's another thing that they need to fix is this red tape of getting things approved through DOD and the acquisition process of the various divisions of the energy department. And
good luck.
I mean, it's just insane. They cut their nose off to spite their face with that stuff. And I'm a guy with good ideas.
They create barriers of entry to create jobs for themselves and just make it more difficult and slow the whole machine down and the whole process down. Because who really gives a shit? We're just going to take your money and pay ourselves with it anyway. Like, it's fucking taxes. They don't care.
I hear you, man. Well, they say good enough is the enemy of great.
Yeah, right.
And it's I had a number of my mates that I've been around, in various communities. One of my mentors was Steve Arrington, who he was an EOD guy in Nam, and he ended up being a expedition leader for the Cousteaus, actually on Alcyon and Calypso for the new discovery of the world. And he has really unique storyline and all that he did and represented, moving from a military Vietnam era EOD diver, first deal he wasn't a teams guy. He was a frogman, but he went from there into being an expedition leader for Cousteau. He was running some training over in Divers Institute of Technology or something like that in California. Cousteau walks in, met him, and one thing led to another, and he ends up being his freaking diving supervisor and expedition leader for Cousteau.
Wow.
Yeah. So those kind of pathways are there. And that's another thing, including with Dugan, what led me to understand, some of these warfighters, whether they have diving experience or not, they're the type that can learn it. And then they have that purpose, that desire to actually do something. And they have the fortitude to follow through.
Sure.
Sure.
They're tenacious. They just need a mission.
Absolutely.
And that's the hardest part, getting out and losing that. It's like, what the hell do I do?
Yeah.
I've tried to latch on to just like fatherhood. Like that's a mission. That's a noble thing, but it doesn't fully scratch that itch of self-progression or of, I don't know how to describe it. Like the things that excite you the most,
right?
That the guys that have that hunger, that are looking over the fence at the horizon,
they got
like,
the eye.
There's some shit out there. I
hear you, mate. Well, I took the time, to really investigate you and do my intel, and what a cool life, and what an intriguing and very insightful way you've pursued the things that you've done, and now you've got fatherhood, and you're going into the military, then getting out, and then, firefighting and EMS, and just everything that you've done, is very rewarding. So you just got to find that new dimension.
Thank you.
Maybe that's something that we could talk about, in a different genre. I mean, you say you dive. Have you ever thought about applying that capacity to the discovery process or exploration?
A little bit. When my wife and I first got together, we had a real passion for travel. A month after we met, we went to Italy. And then I went and got my dive cert with a friend in Hawaii, and then got her later. And so then everywhere we went was around diving.
Right.
And then we had a kid. And I mean, I quit my job at the fire department to go contract to purchase a boat and circumnavigate. That was
wow.
And that's still my mission. My 6-year-old and I talk about it all the time. Dad, when we buy our boat, where are we going first? And he's all in. And
that's the way to do it, Dad.
And my wife's due again in August, so we're gonna have to kick that can a few more years till the younger one is there. But pregnancy has made her more susceptible to seasickness. So I don't know how that's going to go for her. But in my opinion, like, we can port hop all the way around until we got to jump the Pacific and the Atlantic. Otherwise, like, I can call my buddies and bring it in to help with those crossings. But that's as far as like how to do it as a lifestyle that I think I got. I didn't know about things like what you're doing or have that upbringing to conceptualize it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't grow up near the coast.
Well, I would love to introduce you to one of my buddies. He and I were inducted into the club at the same time back in 2009. Ben Edelstein, quite the dude. He is the real deal. He commercial real estate guy, made a mint, and all that, and got a wild hair, always wanted to sail.
Yeah.
Went down to Kama or Seabrook or something like that, bought a boat, dicked around with it, tricked it out, outfitted her, started sailing around, got farther and farther afield. Well, wouldn't you know, he decided he wanted to circumnavigate. Yeah. And it started out being one of those, like, I'm going to do it quick.
Yeah.
Well, he calls it the low, slow orbit. And he took 7 years, but he went through everything, dude.
That's awesome.
The name of his boat's the Gypsy Soul.
Nice.
And I've always kind of given him grief because he is one of the most capable watermen you'd ever want to meet. Wow. Great sailor, can handle the boat by himself if he has to. But he never really had any of that science, that purpose. And he always was, this and that. And I'm like, well, dude, you just got to do this, because his skill sets are there. But unless you put that nugget
give him a
of
direction,
purpose,
like put it into
And that's what I do. My thing that I found I'm really good at is team building. I build really good teams because I'm around so many cool people, and then I have these crazy ideas, and I put it together, and we go do stuff, and that's really the difference. Is like in all things, I think the most effective entities, whether they're a company or a military organization or whatever, is the people, surrounding them with people that are equal or better than you, And that's what I've been able to do is really assemble teams and that purpose. And then, of course, Edelstein I give him a lot of a lot, you know, how close buddies are. And like,
Oh yeah.
he's done some cool stuff, but he always wondered, you know, how do you do that, Joe? How do you do? And I said, well, you know, it's that whole purpose, you know, initiating science. Another one of my buddies in the club, Ben LeCompte, very well known. He's the first guy to swim the Atlantic, and he was on all the big shows, Oprah and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
He came to me in the chapter and was like, John, he's originally from Paris. He's French. And he wanted to swim the Pacific. And he wanted to go from Tokyo to San Francisco. And he had made an attempt, and this and that, and one thing happened. And I went to him, and he came to me, and we kind of had a conversation. And he said, well, what do I do? How do I make this, you know, more functional? I said, well, Ben, you know, you're already doing something that's just amazing. If you just add the science component, because he was swimming through the Pacific Gyre, that thing that is supposed to have all the plastic and everything in it. So I told him, you need to instrument yourself. You need to be like a biological probe out there, you know? So he did that. He went and he got his boat and he put instruments on it. He got a science lead. Wow. Really, I forgot her name. So bad. All through a conversation, you know, that he and I had, and he instrumented himself. So he was able to literally, in his swim, which was all GPS tracked and all that, he would literally swam across the Pacific after having done the Atlantic already. And the difference was that he actually implemented that science component. Well, that then in turn was enabled him to get what's known as a flag. The Explorers Club basically baptizes and blesses you and says, you are worthy, you can carry one of our flags. Well, these aren't just random flags. These flags are numbered, and they have a lineage going back 100 years sometimes. Wow. And each flag that this expedition was on is noted. So one of my flag expeditions, the flag was number 97. Well, the first time it went was on a Mayan pyramid kind of ruins thing in 1939 before World War II. And each time it went on an expedition, it's numbered. So the way you get that honor and privilege is by having the science component. You know, you can go out and do something really cool, but if you don't have that purpose, you're not going to get.
I'm sure it also helps with funding to get something like that. If you can prove there's a legit scientific purpose, like you can pitch this to companies and to even government contracts to do research, right?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of the, you know, 'cause I'm the wreck guy and people and all that. I found a bacterial mat, and I knew what I was looking at, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. On a volcanic seep off Ritter Island. As a dogleg here, you know, self-aggrandizing. I'm the first person in history to circumnavigate an active underwater volcano. Wow. And I did that at Ritter Island. It took me 5 dives total, but I literally overlapped GPS. The launch would drop me off, and I would go down sometimes in excess of 100 meters, going around this place called Ritter Island. It's the site of the largest lateral collapse of a volcanic island in history. 5 cubic kilometers sloughed off in a single event in 1888. Generating tsunamis in excess of 150 feet, you know, wow, 60, 70 meter, you know,
no kidding,
things just in some areas. Yeah. Sakar Island had a run up that was over 200 feet. And the facing edge of the Huon Peninsula, which is like 23 miles away, had a tsunami go up 90 feet, you know, because these are actual sloughs.
Yeah.
You know, the volcano is like a cone, and it goes in one event, you know.
What were the conditions like under there? Was it venting? Was it still?
Well, the active caldera is down 1,000 feet, so I never got near it, but I did go down they have these things called dikes and scoria. Dikes is the hard stuff, and scoria is the stuff.
Okay.
So the dike stays, and the scoria sloughs off over time, like sand. So these dikes look like stegosaurus bones going into the middle of the caldera, and I was like going along, diving. Everything's cool, and I started going, it doesn't look like there's many fish around here. Whoa! The minute I kind of visually kind of put 2 and 2 together, blooms of hot water, like,
yeah,
come up. And of course, I had my wetsuit on. I felt it on my cheek and on my hands, and everything wasn't covered. I did a 180 so fast,
Hell
dude,
yeah.
and split back the
You get steamed down there.
I'd be like, you know, it's like frothing the water.
Hell yeah.
You know, like I'm a lobster or something. But no, that was the only time I really had anything. And that was on the caldera side, obviously. And that wasn't actually on my circumnavigator. That was on another dive that I did later on, because on my dive, my little transit where I went around, it's about a nautical mile curve like this, and slopes off, perfect slope with, you know, moray eels and fans and rocks and just
bunch
not
of dikes
much
down there.
But on the caldera side, oh yeah,
Stay away from those dikes.
yeah, those dikes, man, they'll get you.
They're masculine.
But there was an amphitheater down there, dude. It was crazy. This dike literally created, it looked like something at Notre Dame. The scoria had fallen away, and these dikes were sitting out. The lava had gone out and literally almost made a dome.
Wow.
Like probably 100-foot arc, and I'm down about 150, 160 feet with fish, jacks and stuff. And it was ethereal with these like structures coming up. I knew what they were, but my mind was telling me they were like man-made. And it's between this pass I named for my son, Glenn's Gates. It's between the main island and this little scoria field, and then these two big islands. They're smaller than the main, but really stunning.
That's
so
cool.
The things I've seen, But anyways, back to this dike where I got burned. On the process, on the way back up, I was kind of like, cussing myself out. What a dumbass. And then I was hanging, just kind of chilling and looking at this thing, and these bubbles were popping up. And I went down and looked at it, and there was this weird little mat. It looked like almost like scum, like a little brown, kind of orangey kind of thing, kind of just moving like this in the flow of the bubbles. Well, Mary Wixton, who's a professor emeritus of biology at A&M, she's my biologist on this expedition. I took her down there and I showed her that, and it's only in 9 meters of water, which is, less than 30 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, wow. She talks like a World War II Marine Corps drill sergeant, John, do you know what you have? You know what that is? And I'm like, oh no, tell me. And I knew it was something, but my dumb ass didn't know what I was looking at. And so she took pictures and a little bit of sample, goes back to A&M where Dr. Heath Mills, he's the world's leading microbiologist for deep water organisms. They look at this freaking mat, and it ends up having, at the time, they didn't know this, but it ended up fruiting. This is 2009, 2010 that this happened. But he wanted to know more about it because these specific types of bacterial mats generally happen really, really deep along volcanic seeps because they're chemosynthetic. Chemo means that they're dependent upon the gases and the nutrients that are emitted from the seep, not sun. So you have photosynthetic, which most critters are based on that algic photosynthesis thing that is, chemosynthetic does not need light. They can exist from the chemicals that are exuded. The thing that makes this mat so cool is it's only in 9 meters of water, because when you sample things from deep water, they go through a transition like decompression, temperature shift, and all that.
Multiple
so you end up with a dead
pressure.
mat.
Oh.
So the bacteria is no longer active. That mat being at that depth enabled a live sample to be taken. And the last I heard, I need to follow up on this. There's a whole nother evolution of things, but Dr. Heath Mills apparently analyzed that, and he said that specific bacterial mat had applications, and this is goosebump, stuff for warriors, for antiparalytic and anti-carcinogenic applications. Really? There were enzymes or some proteins or something in that could be harvested and used to actually mend neurocells for paralysis.
Yeah.
So
spinal cord injuries and for nerve damage.
Yeah. And then carcinogenic, anti-cancer. So it goes back to that thing, how there's things in the sea and in the jungle that are out there that need to be discovered that could be the cure to cancer.
Do you think that if we found it, they would let us have it?
Oh, well, that's a whole nother thing. Dude, that's a whole nother evolution. That's like, Reader's Digest and science.
Man.
Like, one day we'll live forever. Yeah, the guys that can afford to live forever.
No shit, right?
That's why it's living, dude.
That's so interesting. John, thank you for coming in, man. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I hope I answered some of your questions.
Absolutely. You are a modern day Indiana Jones, and I think what you're doing is awesome. You're absolutely giving back. You're telling a story. You're helping the environment. You're touching in conservation. You're bringing people together, and I think it's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it coming from you, mate. And it's really people like you and what you represent that I try to reach out and make a difference. And exploration's where it's at, man.
Well, there's not a doubt in my mind you are, and I would love to join you sometime. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, dude.
I appreciate it. Stay zero.